Hey guys, it's Lisa Childs here from triedtestedandtrue.com, and today I'm sharing with you everything I wish I had known about sourdough before I started. I've been baking sourdough religiously since March 2020 when I just happened to find myself with a lot of extra time at home. I think you know what I'm talking about, and a lot of you also out there got on the sourdough wagon, and I have never looked back and never regret it. It's amazing. So let me tell you everything I wish I had known before I started baking sourdough. It seems really intimidating, but I promise it's not that bad. Number one is like what sourdough actually is. For me, I always thought it was just a type of bread that tasted really good. I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't know how complex and how different it was than conventional bread. Sourdough is how bread was made for centuries before we had conventional yeast. It's natural yeast. So if you ever hear of sourdough or natural yeast, they're the same thing, and you can use your sourdough starter for natural yeast bread recipes. The second thing are the ingredients for sourdough. The only thing, which I think is amazing, the only ingredients that you need for sourdough bread are flour, water, salt, and air. My friend Amber from Amber's Kitchen is like the sourdough queen. She taught me that you cannot survive on flour, water, and salt alone, but when you put them together, you can live forever because you'll be fed forever with that amazing natural yeast. The third thing to know about sourdough is that it is a fermented food. That is why it is so healthy for you, and a lot of people who can't tolerate gluten or bread or carbs on their stomach, they can handle sourdough bread because it's so healthy and it's such a good food for you. Okay, now let's jump into kind of the nitty-gritty of these tips. The first thing is that sourdough is resilient. This is the sourdough starter that I have had for a little over 2 years that my friend Amber gave me. And at first I was so worried about killing it, that I wasn't maintaining it correctly, that I wasn't doing it right. But here's the thing, it's really hard to kill a sourdough starter. So just take a breath and relax. Don't worry, it's all going to be okay. The first thing I wish someone would have told me is that I don't need to keep my sourdough starter alive and well on the counter every single day and feed it every single day. That's not necessary at all. I always just keep mine in the fridge, just in this jar with the lid on, and I'll keep it in the fridge for weeks at a time before feeding. Of course, when it's in a dormant state and it hasn't been fed in a while, it's not as active, and so it might take 1 or 2 feeds before I get it to a good spot where I want to bake with it, because it needs to be bubbly and active and really nice and alive before you bake with it. But you can just keep it in the fridge and just let it sit there for as long as you want. After a while, you may see kind of a darker liquid that has accumulated on top of your start, and that is totally fine. That's just alcohol that has built up from the fermentation, and you can mix it into your start if you want it to keep that really nice sour flavor. If you want a more mild sourdough, then you can just dump that out, and then you can just dump out the liquid and then just feed it and use it as normal. The next thing that really surprised me about sourdough is that it takes a ton of time. It is a very time-intensive process, and things take a lot of time to develop those glutens, for the start to digest all that yummy food, the flour and the carbs and all of that. And so when I was waiting for my bread to rise, it took significantly longer than if you were using conventional yeast. Conventional yeast is just that brown kind of granulated stuff that you put into your bread recipes, and it smells very yeasty. That is conventionally made, and so it's not natural, but it is really quick. You can make breads and yeasted breads super quickly. Natural yeast takes a long time. Next is your start. So if you don't have someone to give you a start, you just need to make your start, which I'll make a separate video about later. But if you already have a start, this is what it looks like. And what I wish I had known about this is that there are 2 states start. So right now, my start, it's very hungry. It hasn't been fed in a long time. It's very slack, it's loose, it's like kind of dripping out of the jar, and this is in its inactive state. It hasn't been fed in a while, and so it's not active. Here you see that my start is activating because I just fed it, and it's growing to double its size, but there are 2 states, inactive, active. Another thing you'll often hear is the word discard. So a lot of people, when they feed their sourdough starter, will say throw away half of this and then replace it with fresh water and fresh flour and just throw it away. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to throw away or discard. I only keep a little bit of my starter, and then I just feed it for however much I need. You don't need to be wasting sourdough starter and throwing it away every single day. If you do have extra discard, what you can do is use it for recipes that call for inactive or discard. Some of my favorite recipes are sourdough crackers, waffles, pancakes, and other types of breads and baked goods that you don't need the start to be super active and bubbly. Next is that the most important ingredient in sourdough is time. If you don't have time, if you don't give your bread the time, it won't develop. It won't develop those beautiful air bubbles in your crumb, and it won't stay together. So you need to give it time to bulk ferment. You need to give it time to rise. It takes a long time, like I mentioned before, but it's worth it. If you've ever seen any videos where they have those fancy banneton baskets and the razor where you slash your bread and all these fancy tools, you really don't need any of that. The only tool that I think you really need is a food scale, which I recommend anyway. If you don't have a scale, that's totally fine. There are recipes that I can recommend that I'll link down below that only use cups and that I've used with great success. I just find with the most perfect and accurate sourdough, you want to use a scale because you want to get those proportions and ratios correct. The next thing that kind of surprised me about sourdough bread and working with sourdough bread is that usually when your bread dough, like if you're making cinnamon rolls or any other type of bread dough, when it's sticky, what do? You add more flour. With sourdough, it's the complete opposite. You don't add any flour, you add water. So when you're doing folds and you have sticky dough, you wet your hands and you wet the counter with some water, and that is what you use when your sourdough bread is sticky. The other component to that is instead of water, another way that you can get your sourdough bread to firm up is to just give it time and tension and folds. It's amazing what time can do to sourdough bread, but as I give you more videos on a step-by-step on how to make sourdough bread, you'll find that you don't have to knead sourdough bread and like abuse it and mix it in a really industrial mixer. All you need to do is gently fold it and turn it. That's all you have to do, and it's so satisfying and I love it. The next thing I would tell any beginner sourdough baker is to use quality ingredients. Since there are only so many ingredients in your bread, flour, salt, water, and air, you really want to try and get the best ingredients you can. I use Lehigh Mills flour. It's a local mill here in Utah and it's unbleached. It's very good, high gluten flour. I also only use real salt, Redmond real salt. You know I love them. I'll link to them in my description as well. And if possible, use filtered water. So much of the recipe is water, and if you don't have a good tasting water, your bread will suffer as a result. One question I get a lot is how to make your bread more or less sour. One way I found to make it more sour is to use whole wheat flour in addition to white flour. I like adding just about 100 grams of whole wheat flour to my recipes, and it just has so much of a more complex and rich sour taste, and it's so much better than using just only white flour. Another way that you can make your bread more sour is by fermenting it longer, because then there's more alcohol buildup and you get that sour taste. I love that sour tanginess, and I've also found that the next day my bread is a lot more sour as well. Okay, that's all I have for you today, but those are the top things that I wish I had known before I started making sourdough bread. The biggest thing, honestly, is just don't freak out. It can feel really overwhelming, but this thing is so resilient. Like, there's no way I could have kept anything else alive. This has been kept alive in my fridge for years, literally. So you can do it too, and I can't wait to share with you more. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want more videos like this, please let me know. This is kind of my first in my sourdough series, but I love it and I want to share it with you. Make sure you watch my best Instant Pot accessories to buy and avoid video next if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time. Bye.